This path called Dhamma, the one taught by Lord Buddha, requires maturity. And to be specific, it requires emotional maturity. There's no ifs and buts about that. But rare are those of us who really come to this path with that level of development. Many of us come from different levels with different capacities of understanding the Dhamma. And often, we might not have what it takes to really identify what is what. And that's okay. That's okay. Because the Dhamma is an educational system. It's supremely useful and helpful method of evolving the person, causing growth to happen within us. And that's where teachers come in. The greatest of all being Lord Buddha. But he is dead and gone, right? In his stead, we have the Dhamma, of course. And we can read the Dhamma through the suttas to become more familiarized with it, to try to penetrate it, to understand it. But usually, for most of us, it is a matter of simply trying to fit whatever the Dhamma that we are picking up, plucking out of the vastness of the teachings that were given to us by Lord Buddha, and trying to organize them to try to fit them in the available spaces in our mental bookshelves. Whatever we think it should represent, whatever we understand to be the meaning of what Lord Buddha meant. This is futile. Only causes us to waste more time, precious time. Many of us are like those boats that are firmly tied into the docks, firmly, with ropes that are so sturdy, sometimes more than just one rope, tying us to the dock, to the port. Yet as we look at the Dhamma, as we listen to Dhamma talks or read or listen, we start imagining things. We start believing things. We start convincing ourselves of things, of attainments, of experiences. It's like somebody sitting in that boat with a whole ton of brochures of how life is like in Fiji, how life is like in New Zealand, how it is like in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, the boat is firmly tied to the dock without having moved an inch. In our minds, we have perfected our skills at deception, deceiving ourselves mostly. This is where our sannyas and sankharas come in. Our expectations, notions, narratives, interpretations of how life is supposed to be like, how life is like in Fiji. Meanwhile, we're sitting comfortably in the boat. And yes, the boat is kind of wobbling on the waves, but on the shore, at the dock, firmly tied in. We've never left. But there's other ships there too, other boats too, tied in just as firmly as ours. And we start talking and communicating with each other, with the other occupants of the other boats. And guess what? We start believing that, yes, we're on this journey. Yes, yes. Meanwhile, nothing's happened. There's no development. It's just a self-deception. Nothing's changed. There were many people who used to come to Lord Buddha, trying to get teachings, to venerate, to worship, to pay respects to Lord Buddha. Many, countless. And in Nagita Sutta, Lord Buddha says something, well, he says many things, but in this particular sutta, I recorded it last night, that's why it's so fresh in my mind. He gets a visit by this townsfolk, these people from a city that he just had arrived at. Ichanangala, I believe, Ichanangala townspeople. So he was sitting, he was staying at the outskirts of the city in the forest of this town, of this city. So these Brahmins talk about, well, there is the Arahant, there's a very good report on him. So they say he's an Arahant, so we might as well go and pay our respects, etc., etc. A person like of his character, of his caliber, comes along every, so rarely, in fact. So they prepare food and they go in the morning. So they're waiting outside the forest, the entrance to where the Sangha was staying. They can't just interfere. They can't just come in. There are protocols. There's boundaries that they need to respect. In those days, they knew these things by heart, by custom. But that didn't stop them from talking and chit-chatting and just being such loud people. So Lord Buddha turns to his attendant at that time, who was the Venerable Nagita. This is before Venerable Ananda became his attendant, his cousin. And he says to Nagita, he says, Nagita, who are these? Where is this noise coming from? It sounds like a group of fishermen that are hauling in their catch of the day. What is this? And Venerable Nagita says, Bhante, it's a group of the Brahmins from the town, from the city, who learned that you're here, we're here. So they prepared food and they brought it to offer it to the Sangha, to Lord Buddha. And the Buddha says, you can almost imagine him sitting there and just maybe even wiping his forehead and saying, Nagita, I just cannot tolerate being famous, being renowned, being praised. And he even says beautifully, may fame never come to me. May renown never come to me, he says. And not Venerable Nagita asks him again, etc. And then Venerable Lord Buddha repeats it. But why? Most people think that Lord Buddha was just like really desperate in getting more and more students, the way many teachers are today, the way many students want to become teachers these days. He would actually push them away. Literally, just like he would run, he would just go into the forest. Sometimes it's hard for students to understand how difficult of a task a teacher's job is. So difficult. And if anyone's in their right mind, they would not want to become a teacher in this path, so long as they are following the example of Lord Buddha, that is. We need to underline that, because we have the majority of followers today wanting to become teachers in their own right. They're after praise. They're after becoming famous somehow, getting an acknowledgement that perhaps they never got growing up. Or, like I used to say to some people, just like it's filling up an empty jar, a big barrel that's empty underneath. There's a hole in there. You can try to squeeze in there the whole entire waters of the oceans, and it will not even get filled up by even a single drop. But how can a person know this? How can a person really come to understand and appreciate this, to realize this, to see it? They must first look at their thought content in their minds. Thoughts are extremely important. And this is where Lord Buddha was exceptional in his teaching, because he would always start with the mind, the actions committed by the mind. To this day, we have individuals who just look at what is observable, what is seen by the outside world, what is heard by the outside world, but not so much as to how I'm thinking in secret. No one can hear my thoughts, right? Not always. But sometimes it can be surprising how sooner or later our actions will sabotage us in our own understanding of how thoughts don't matter. I've mentioned in the past how I've even come across Buddhist monks teaching that the mental action isn't necessarily something that leads to collecting of kamma or kamma vipaka, meaning they don't matter as much as our words and actions, physical actions do. And that is absolute, utter nonsense. In Christianity, there is this term called blasphemy. That would be considered as Buddhist blasphemy. Complete nonsense. But this is the one area that many of us avoid looking at. It is embarrassing. It's something that we're not so proud of. We definitely will not display this to the world, because most of the time we're running away from this. Remember that bookshelf with the empty spaces, which we try to selectively pick out things from the Dhamma, from this and that, to try to squeeze it in there? And we have a limitless plethora of things out there that we can idealize about, romanticize about, in fact, within the tradition. Oh, so-and-so teacher used to do this. Oh, so-and-so tradition, we find this. Yes, but have you ever studied with that teacher? Beyond the pages that you might have gotten snippets of what you think to be reality? Have you actually lived within that tradition? Seeing how it feels like to be there day in, day out? Really? So there's so many lies we tell ourselves. But sooner or later, those lies reveal themselves. Sooner or later, we're going to look back and we're going to see the dock is over there and people are there taking pictures of the dock, and we're tied so firmly to it. We're not in Fiji. We're not in New Zealand. We're nowhere, in fact, other than there. We never left. And that is shocking to most of us when we realize the reality of the situation. Remember what I said in the beginning, how this path requires maturity, and specifically emotional maturity. Emotional maturity forces us to become more responsible of our own selves. Emotional maturity. Children, on the other hand, we all have been children at one point. Children have a tendency of looking outside, always looking outside for comfort, for this, for that, for support, for refuge, for safety, for this or for that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But many of us carry on that legacy all the way to our deaths later on in years down the road. We never allow ourselves to take on the responsibility of growth, because we can always look back and see the rope tied very firmly to the dock. We can untie it. We're the ones who actually tied it that tightly. But it's more comfortable. Why? Because it's safer. But it's not so difficult to imagine things, right? To think about things, to presume things, and to find other people who are like us in other boats, never having left the docks. And this is where the Dhamma itself can become a stumbling block. What I've mentioned in the previous talks, how it can take on the form of even an addiction. Addiction. You have individuals, for example, in AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is something that is seen around the world, which is a great organization or a way to help addicts. But something that oftentimes is neglected to be considered is that although the addict, whatever it was, the addiction was, maybe it was alcohol, maybe it was something else, although they stop, many of them, it's a 12-step program, although they stop at one point or another from consuming this thing or being driven to do this activity that was toxic, although they stop, but they start a new addiction, which is to add more of these lovely gatherings of AA meetings. So it is no surprise to find an individual who never participated to suddenly participating over 9, 12, 15, sometimes even 20 to 20 sessions per week, sometimes 3 sessions a day. this causes the person to feel good. And if they miss one, they become very agitated. Exactly how it would feel if they were to stop, as we say in America, cold turkey. So even the Dhamma can become one of those addictions. And there's no wisdom there. There's no growth there. Because the eyes will never turn inward, just like the child's. The child's eyes are always directed outward, looking for praise, looking for attention, whatever kind of attention. Looking for comfort, looking for solace, looking for something, a soothing sensation, but never turning the gaze inward. And this, again, is where we must have the emotional maturity, because it takes emotional maturity to look inward and to see the quality of the mind, whether in fact it is living and staying with the Dhamma. Not talking about it to ourselves, but living it. Before the body engages in unwholesome or akusala kamma, it has already engaged with akusala mental kamma. We've passed the point of no return. Absolutely. Before it even turns into words, it's past the point of no return because we thought about it. We allowed the thought to occur, let alone the mental conversations that take place in the mind. The whole entire monologues that take place in the mind, the judgments and this and that, excuse me. The likes and dislikes. I love this. I hate that. Yes, we have different terms that Lord Buddha gave us, like the aggregates. But these are just terms, so long as the eyes are not turned inward to look for them inside of ourselves, not somewhere out there in the life of some teacher here or there, and trying to living the truth of that principle through osmosis, if you will. By talking about it does not make it our own reality. Lord Buddha attained, the Arya Savakas attained. That was their truth. They did the work. They left. They cut the rope from the dock. And they said, come what may, I am going to go all the way into the open waters. I don't care what storms I am to face. I will face them. Because that's the only way that we can empty out the bookshelves, our bookshelves, in our minds as to what is what and how things are supposed to be. And instead of living it, living the truth of the Dhamma. And that requires tremendous maturity, which is very rare these days. Very rare. So there's a lot of fraudulent Dhamma out there. But our eyes will not capture that. The fact that they are fraudulent, corrupt, fake. Why? Because it requires an expert to see that. And what is the expert? The expert is anyone who has the ability to look inward and to see the quality of their thoughts, choosing their thoughts according to the Dhamma, identifying what is wholesome and what is not, and living accordingly. That's when sila becomes sila, not some outside shell-like structure of what a sila is. A person might bow down every day and take the 5 precepts, 8 precepts, 10 precepts, 227 precepts. And for all intents and purposes, so long as all the conditions are right, no one's coming and stepping on their emotional toes, if you will, everything's fine. They're practically arahants. But life has a tendency of surprising us, pinching us here and there. And suddenly, we realize, at least momentarily, that the causes and conditions for ignorance and for suffering specifically have never left. They were always there. They never left the scene. That's why you have a lot of disappointed eyes at the time of death. A lot. Because those eyes had spent a whole lifetime looking outward, looking for things in the outside world, looking for comfort, looking for this, looking for soothing. And anything that is not, anything that does not fit the bill, anything that rubs me the wrong way, I don't have time for that. Well, that is not maturity. That is immaturity. And we have a lot of that today within the Dhamma circles. And one of the greatest ways to compensate for this, most people will rush in and want to become teachers, which actually drags down, much like the Titanic, further and further down into the abyss of ignorance and darkness. The Titanic being the Dhamma, the teachings of Lord Buddha. Starting with ourselves. So, the teachers, starting with Lord Buddha, their intention was very clear: to stop the nonsense, going on in our mind, let alone spewing it out, spewing that vomit of unwholesome thoughts out. So we must be very careful. Very careful. Just like the Alagadupama Sutta, where Lord Buddha says, without understanding and talking about the Dhamma, or even thinking that we're practicing the Dhamma, without understanding, without honesty, without sila, without proper practice of samadhi, there's no punya, obviously. It's very much like trying to hold a water snake from its tail. Good luck. You're going to be dead soon, very quickly, actually, because it has the worst venom, they say. Because it only gets one shot in the water. So we must be very respectful of the quality of our thoughts and what we put in there, especially when we start to attribute some of the Dhamma to those thoughts. We don't have any right to do so unless we have the ability to show for it through actions, mental actions starting, and looking down and seeing whether we are tied into the dock or not. And if we are, might as well just shut up and work on ourselves. The crowd is the most stupidest thing. And you have a lot of crowds these days. You don't find intelligence in the crowd. You just have other people sounding the same words and thinking as you. The individual, however, it's a different story altogether. That's why the bhikkhus used to go to the forest or anywhere where they're secluded, to work on themselves. Because there, you're not going to be able to fool yourself. Sooner or later, you're going to realize, hey, the world, I just literally left it behind me. Why am I still thinking about it? So and so said this to me, so and so did that to me, etc. I've been living here for 17 years and I still keep thinking about them. Sooner or later, that secluded environment will start to sink in, hopefully, sooner than later. And finally, the person develops that sense of emotional maturity to start saying, I've been looking outward. Let me gaze back in, maybe for the first time. So we need to get our priorities straight when we are engaged with the Dhamma. The Dhamma is not what we think it is. It never is. Never. And this is where emotional maturity also develops, blossoms into humility. And that humility must be there. Again, this is a quality that is lacking today in many students of the Dhamma. Oddly enough, especially in those who want desperately to become teachers. Today, we're living in a time period where we gravitate naturally towards people who are a little bit more agreeable to us, who say things softly, who are kind and gentle, baby us, nurture us. When I was a child, my parents used to tell me how the plant that is growing, that we have sown the seeds, and they're now blossoming and they're coming, piercing through the soil, rising. That is the time when they have to put a very sturdy, seriously sturdy metal or something that is rigid and tie that stem, blossoming plant around it. Otherwise, good luck getting a proper tree out of it. So, in this fake society, talking about the Dhamma, we need to be careful not to bring that fakeness into it, because there's plenty of that today. To the point, this is where it gets dangerous, where we can start to convince ourselves that what is in fact fake is real. So one of the crucial things to remember is not to fantasize and not to create this romantic image of how it is supposed to be or used to be in some long forgotten time period, or how it is in other parts of the world, in such and such a place, and this and that. Mental kamma, akusala kamma, in fact. Because there's a delay, and there definitely is ditti, in fact, miccha ditti, which is wrong view, and there's definitely conceit, mana there. And they're not someone else's, by the way. They're ours. However, it is a mature, emotionally mature mind that will be able to look inward and to see this for oneself. No amount of teaching, scolding, shaking, even beating in some cases can help a student see that. Lord Buddha was very stern when it was needed for him to be stern. You have countless examples of this. But just like in the case of governments and political ideals, agendas, there's these common themes that most countries have developed over centuries. One of them, classic, is liberty for all. Another one is fraternity, being so kind and loving. Love is sometimes another one. Care is another one. Compassion is another one. Democracy, or giving someone whatever you want for yourself. All these lofty, lofty ideals that remain just that, ideals. We must be careful not to fall in love with the shell, like many of these movements, human endeavors that happen still. And people give their lives to these shells. We never penetrate inside the shell, what's underneath it. We never want to get involved with that. And that is the practice. That is when we make the Dhamma stay in our hearts. Not be captives, not be slaves of our sanya, of our sankharas, because that's what we usually are. We are slaves of our own ideas, sanya, perceptions. Perception is not just a word you see in some pages here and there, suttas. It is very real in your living experience. It is how you think, how you interpret, how you expect things to be, your notions. And once you give them free rein, guess what? It's out of your hands, because now the sankharas are building, concocting, creating new stories, which you now dedicate your life, your energy, and definitely your thoughts, your words, and your actions to, physical actions too. So the Dhamma is not about sitting and having some attainments. Anyone who tells you that, they don't know what they're talking about. Living the Dhamma is not just about seeing intellectually. It's about taking that seeing, even if it's of the intellectual quality, and bringing it in, not minding about the world outside. Making it your own reality by practicing and tasting it. That's why I never care for someone who comes to me and say, Bhante, I'm now a Sotapanna, I'm now a Sakadagami. Do you think I'm an Anagami? All these terms. You have committees, you have groups of people, that's their conversation these days in some circles. Oh, I wonder I'm a Sotapanna. Do you think who cares? How is your behavior really? How is your sila? That's what matters. The Buddha did not start with samadhi. He started with sila. Sila. But then you have a lot of teachers today who want the opposite of what Lord Buddha wanted, which is fame, praise, renown. A huge gathering. I was once in a group of students, and this particular teacher started saying, well, I have over 3,000 students. Now I just put my hand against my forehead and just go, oh my, oh my. How in the world can you be a teacher to 3,000? Well, now it's probably grown to 30,000. I help just a few students. And I have to turn many of them away. I get emails. Because there's a lot of Dhamma out there. Lord Buddha is the best teacher. You have a lot of Dhamma talks out there. Apply it in your life. Taste it. Practice it. What are these 5 silas, these precepts that we take? What are they? Let me test this today. Let me see how many times I'm going to be mindful of just one, and just keeping it to myself. Not turn that into a topic for me to talk about with a group. Remember the AA meetings, the addiction? We have today the addiction of Dhamma circles like that, where no Dhamma is taking place. But there is the illusion that we are. These words have to be spoken, because I don't hear them out there being spoken. And if they are today, in some ways, unfortunately, they are of teachers who have passed away. But let us be our own teachers. Let us be very careful, diligent, and demanding of ourselves, because that's the only way that we're going to develop that emotional maturity. Otherwise, it won't happen on its own. It will not. And stop being babies and coming up with ways to justify our likes, and similarly, justify our dislikes as to why we hate these things, and labeling them, which is another form of sanya, another way of saying sanya. Lord Buddha, at his awakening, he also said a few phrases. He says, Aneka jati sangsarang sandhavisang anibhisang gahakarang gavesanto dukkha jati punappunam gahakaraka dittosi punagehan kahasi sabbate pasuka bagga gahakutang visankatan visankara gatang chittang tanhanang kaya majjaga. For eons, you've constructed, he says. Oh, architect, oh, house builder. You have driven me from life to life on a leash, as it were, keeping me busy with likes and dislikes, constructing these things, destroying those things, always engaged with the other. Leaving here, going there. Not liking this, jumping to that. Moment to moment, and especially from life to life, throughout samsara. Painful, suffering-induced birth and death. Birth and death. Countless eons. You've driven me, but now I have seen you, he says. Dittosi, I see you, he says. Well, see what? Who is this architect? Is it Mara, this ephemeral, mythological, this entity? No, it is your sanya, our sanyas, that we constantly build, we constantly manufacture. And sometimes we even give our lives to, justify for this or that reason. There goes another life, by the way. And another, and another, and another. So long as the eyes are gazing outward, we will never see this grand architect, this house builder. It's never outside, never. The Dhamma is simply there to help us turn our gaze inward so we can actually see what's what. That's when we can actually take apart these rafters, these beams, these peaked roofs that we have, dismantling it, taking a chainsaw, taking a hacksaw, taking an axe and destroying it. Every single time a sanya shows up, let me become mindful of it. Let me become alert and see it for what it is. That's where the like and dislike are found. Nowhere else. Nowhere else. They're not inside the eyes of another human being, nor the heart of another being. They're in your heart. Dukkha is here. Samsara is inside. Ignorance, avidya, is here. It's never in the other person, in the eyes of another person. It's in your eyes. It's in your heart. And that's how Lord Buddha says, all your rafters, all your beams that you've constructed are now disassembled, destroyed. Because I have eliminated, I have extinguished, I have destroyed tanha, he says. Craving, that thirst. Again, craving is not something out there, it's not some few droplets of something inside your brain or your heart somewhere. No. Craving is the incessant need to substitute one sanya with another, to buy the story, always ready to believe what your mind is telling you, your notions, your expectations. And how are we building? How are we putting mortar and cement and bricks and beams and wood, hammering them in? By adding more sanya, by adding and constructing sankhara. That's what it means, construction. So long as we're engaged in these two, with these two, all the Dhamma in the world cannot help us. And whatever some teachers have said to us, oh, you have reached this level or that. Next time you're in the kitchen, you're next to the bin, throw that in there as well, in the trash bag, and take it outside. So that's what it's good for. There's no badges, there's no titles. It's your practice. And what you gain out of your practice is your reward, not what someone else, what a teacher gives you. You don't need a teacher's verification of some sort. None of the arahants had to go back and necessarily get the approval or verification of Lord Buddha. Sometimes it happened that they were there, fine, but majority of the time, that was out of respect. They knew, because their lives were perfect mirrors of what was happening inside. And that is authentic living. That is emotional maturity. So the Dhamma is not for babies. It is for mature individuals. And with that, I will pause here and see if you have any questions.
Bhante?
Yes.
I just want to say like a personal thank you for that talk. It was very like timely, I guess, and very powerful as well. The part when you quoted the Buddha's words, that was just. I mean, I think that the whole talk struck a chord actually, but like I don't even know how to convey this in words really, but it was so powerful. The eons of wasted lives, and reflecting on like how I guess like how I've been acting for a while now and looking for excuses. But what I suppose where this turns into a question is it's maybe like double barreled, I guess, is because in the past I dedicated myself so much to the Dharma that it came at the cost of my marriage. Not that we were ever going to like break up or anything, but for years I can't. I think most of the time, nearly 90% of the time, my wife would wake up on her own, you know, because I was already up meditating, or you know, I guess it's just finding that balance, isn't it? Like, what is the balance and what's like slacking off? Because I mean, for instance, if this talk goes over the 9 o'clock mark, am I taking my foot off the gas because I've already said I'll do the 9 o'clock feed for my baby tonight?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that I suppose that's where I've never really been somebody that can sit like freely. I always need some sort of constraints, and usually I go to one extreme as opposed to the other. I wonder if you could maybe advise something like that.
Yes. You touched on it at the end. You said, I have a tendency of going from two extremes, and that is a problem. And Dhamma is not, it is never about the extremes. And Majjhima Pada, the Lord Buddha says, it's the middle path. Now, it doesn't mean some people have actually mistakenly or misrepresented that statement, middle path. Oh, I can do a little bit of this and I can do a little bit of that. I've had people, when I was a layperson, when I said I can't drink, friends of mine, they said, well, even your teacher, Lord Buddha, says middle path, so you should have a little bit of drink. You're not drinking like 3 glasses of wine. Why don't you have one? That's middle. Instead of saying no, which they saw another extreme. So I'm just giving that as a side note. However, the problem lies with us. It's not about the partner. It's not about your wife. It's not about our partners, if we are in those states as lay people. What do I mean by that? Well, oftentimes, we come to a relationship, if not always actually, not just often, we bring our own luggage, our own baggage, our own expectations, our own, in this case, fears. Oh my, if I don't stay with you 24/7, you might leave me. You see this a lot with, for example, adopted children. Once adopted, now they're adopted adults. Well, they're no longer adopted, but they have their own families. But that part of themselves, their mind that used to be adopted or was adopted, still lingers in their interactions. It's that ever-present aftertaste. And in this case, I'll use the example of fear of being abandoned. Because usually in the mind of a child who finds out or knows right at that time, some children know that they're being adopted, that leaves a very deep scar in them. And because, like I was saying earlier, children don't have that maturity to understand, so they go by emotions. They feel very unsafe and feel abandoned because ultimately you were my parents. Now you're giving me away to someone else. So I'm not loved. I don't deserve love. There you go. And even if the new parents, for example, go ahead and shower me with love, they become a Niagara of love all throughout my life, never leaving any space, any areas that I could pretty much complain that I'm not loved. Still, I will have that in me. Why? Because it's a hole, a gaping hole, like I said, with the hole underneath the barrel, that no matter how much water you put in there, it's going to slide through it. Nothing's going to stick. Nothing's going to stay. It won't fill up. So this person, and I'm not, this is not just for adopted individuals, of course. You might come from a normal family or whatever that means, or a healthy family, this and that. But for one reason or another, the person might have that deficit in feeling fine, in feeling okay, being themselves. So then their lives become, I have to do this for you in order for me to see you next to me. And the moment I step out of the room, immediately, guess where the mind goes? You're going to leave me, aren't you? You're just going to the bathroom, you know? There's no need for you to worry about like anything. But I might be exaggerating here in this example, but essentially that is what happens. The tiniest little argument, immediately the mind goes where? Oh, we're breaking apart. Oh, it's doom and gloom. We're gone. It's like all those years are gone, wasted. And this takes away a lot from the partner, from our counterpart, in this case, your wife. I'm not saying your wife particularly, but Any individual who's in this position, could be husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, or even friends, a relationship essentially, where if I don't perform this way, if I don't do this, then the consequences will be extremely dire, bad. And I'm going to be left without you, without love, without companionship, without. Meanwhile, where is this whole thing taking place? In one's own mind. Nowhere else. So unless your partner happens to be Venerable Anuruddha, and I don't mean disrespect to Venerable Anuruddha, just in the sense that the ability to see the minds of others, encompass one's own mind with the minds of others, whereby your partner would be able to see your thoughts and the perplexities and the difficulties and the pain that one is going through. That's going to be left to be your story, only your story. Meanwhile, the person is going through hell, and they're seeing your reactions without any justification. And this is where problems start, because they are not being told what's happening inside your mind about your fears. And they're being like, meanwhile, you're going above and beyond, in fact, saturating them with your presence, in fact, saturating, even though you're trying not to be away, but maybe they need room to breathe, which ends up causing them the worst situation. In fact, even worse than what you were fearing in many cases. Why? Because this is stemming from one's own self, because the eyes were directed outward. They need to be directed inward. That's what I mean. So this is where communication is absolutely essential. Communication with the other people. This is, and if you cannot speak, there's a certain subtlety or whatever, the structure of the relationship perhaps does not allow it, for example. But that does not mean that we need to stop addressing this in a very logical, rational way. Are my fears rational? Am I the only one who happens to leave his partner in bed and goes and meditates? And by the way, why am I ashamed of going and meditating by myself inside the house in another room? I'm not going off with another partner. I'm not cheating on my partner, my wife, my husband. This is good because I'm actually purifying my mind. So my wife should be actually very happy because I am protecting her from the defilements in my heart, from my anger, from my episodes, from my fears, from ever hurting her, from ever cheating on her, from ever saying anything. One's partner needs to be really blind in some ways, mentally or emotionally, not to see and value this. I don't know of any instances where any partner has ever, any wife or husband has ever stood against anyone who went up and sat there and meditated. Now, having said this, many people spend their whole lives with their, with their wives or whatever, but the relationship doesn't grow. So who said that by you sitting there, like keeping guard of the relationship by sitting there in the room with them, saturating them with your presence, is in fact going to help the relationship? In fact, it might be detrimental to the relationship. So you're actually deflating the tension. You're giving room. Ever heard of the statement, familiarity breeds contempt? My parents used to say, even if all your fingers were made out of honey, don't lick all of them. That's a saying. Meaning, you get sick of it. So then where are we left off with this? Like, where does this lead us to? Well, to ourselves, because now we see that the problem was never the partner, never the wife, never the husband. It was us. It was our fear. And this is where your own sanya, your own sankharas are being exposed for what they are. Because simply there was laziness in you, weakness in you, procrastination in you. But sannyas need something concrete, something, anything to build the rest of the castles in the sky on, to tie it to something, to validate their false claims. That's how they do it. Anything, an experience, this and that. But do you see what they said? Or do you see what she said or what he did? That's why I'm like this. That's why I hate them. That's why. No. You are holding the hand of the house builder tightly at that point. Instead of relinquishing it, walking away from it. So check your motives. Be honest. Sit there. Journal, write, and go back and be very careful whether you're editing while you're writing. Oftentimes we do that. And most importantly, always check the thoughts. Thoughts are the most forms of action. After all, Lord Buddha introduced Kamma for the first time proper into the world. The term Kamma was available at the time with Jains and the Brahmanism, etc. But that was all false, because one was saying you're stuck with this, there's nothing you can do about it. And the Jains were saying, well, you need to do things so that you can reduce it, and then once it's completely clean, that's when you're Tirthankara or Jina, which is a conqueror, like Jain or Mahavir or somebody like that. Completely, berserk, completely, nonsense. The Buddha said, no, it's your Cetana. Cetana. It's how much energy you're putting behind your intentionality in thinking this. What's the gasoline? What's the energy? What's the fuel behind this thought? What's the fuel behind these words you're saying or you're about to say? And when you're leaving your room, let's say, going to sit down, do you think you're actually going to be successful in your sit? Oh, no. Part of your brain is going to say, well, see what I'm doing? See, I'm dedicating my time. See what a great student I am, what a great husband I am, etc., etc. You're never saying this to anyone, of course. You're saying it to yourself. But sooner or later, it blows up in our face because we were stifling ourselves. We were creating compulsion. And how can Dhamma grow in compulsion? How? It's the most beautiful thing in the world, in existence. It's perfect. But the sannyas are not going to allow you to see that. Your likes and dislikes will never allow you to see that. Ever. You can go and become a monk. You can go and become a monk in the Thai forest tradition, which, by the way, doesn't exist as Thai forest tradition because most of the forests are gone in Thailand. Gone. Unfortunately, where Ajahn Mun used to walk and his Arya Savakas, sadly, they're gone. Burma is following suit. But it's not the forest that made the Thai forest monk. The Dhamma is being corrupted in the world today. You have pockets of good monks here and there. But we must always check our own motives and our own ideas and fantasies, imagery, romantic ideas of how it used to be. Let's say when you read Ajahn Mun's life, for example. Oh, you want to stay there. And how can anyone blame you? That's the bhikkhu's life. But even at the time of Ajahn Mun, You had bhikkhus who were disrespecting him, not following his directions. Ajahn Man, imagine that. So it's not a typical or a tradition. Bring that tradition into your heart. Bring the Dhamma into your heart. That's the only place it could grow, not in the forest, not even in a robe or any specific color type of a robe, whether it's jackfruit or this. None of it matters. What's here, that's what matters. That's why we call it chitta. Right? But this is continuous effort, continuous self-propelled effort. Your own. Pachatam veditabbo vinyuhiti, Lord Buddha says. This is to be realized by the wise for themselves. And you will never be wise unless you practice, unless you cut that rope, tying you so firmly to the dock and take off. Not physically go somewhere. No, take off into the unknown where sannyas are never listened to again. Your ideas of what the Dhamma is supposed to be or not, what is a true teacher or is not, all of this is nonsense. And remember, even at the time of Lord Buddha, you had thousands of people who would come, not even bow to Lord Buddha, or bow and then get up and they get so excited, yes, I'm going to practice in this. Never practice it. And many people came in, shunned Lord Buddha and walked away. And they said, this is Dhamma? Huh. What an opportunity wasted. What an opportunity that was wasted. So we have a tendency of expecting the Dhamma to be there forever until I get my things straight. No, that's foolishness. The battle is inside with your own sanya. So I will stop here. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, of course, Bhante. Thank you very much. It's powerfully like tugged on the heartstrings. So thank you.
Good. Any other thoughts, questions? Oh, we have, again. But this is good. No time is enough for the Dhamma. There can never be sufficient time where what needs to be said and be constrained by time. That's what I'm trying to say. Even if every millisecond of our lives was dedicated to the Dhamma, listening to the Dhamma, it's not enough. Because there's so much wealth in there. But again, it's not in books. It's not in communication. Yes, communication is extremely helpful. We need that. We need that. It's only a small part. It's not like those AA meetings where they can become addictive. And in fact, those individuals, just to clarify on that so people don't misunderstand, the AA meetings, the 12-step programs, I'm not putting them down because they can be wonderful actually to certain individuals. Individuals who are cognizant enough not to become addicted to the sessions, where they go ahead and talk about my problems, my addiction, this and that. Instead of going and really living by themselves sometime during the week in seclusion, like the Buddhist monks do, like Buddhist practitioners should do. And understand when it's really getting hot, when the drive, those withdrawal periods show up. And instead of rushing to this, because when you're rushing away from something. What is that? That sense of inadequacy, not being fulfilled here with whatever's happening, not liking this, whatever's happening, disliking. What is this? It's not going according to what I like. I like to feel fuzzy inside all the time. Hello. You have people who want to feel piti all the time, the joy, sometimes called rapture. But that's highly unnatural for us to feel because it's going to keep the mind agitated. So the person has now become addicted to that. That's not the Dhamma. It's some of the gifts. Let's stop looking for cookies all the time in every corner of the Dhamma. We're no longer children. We don't need to get lollipops and cookies and candy at every corner of our work. There's going to be a lot of toiling, a lot of work. The boat that's now cut loose is going to be splashed around, slapped, turned all over. But we have to turn it back and get on it and start rowing. And not stop until we've reached our destination. This takes work. That's why it's not everyone's cup of tea, as they say. But the rewards are supramundane. There's nothing like it. Because ultimately what we do practice for is to end suffering. And you might say, well, Bhante, I don't care about Nibbana, this and that. That's okay. Nibbana's other definition is no more suffering. Can you imagine that state? No more suffering, any kind of suffering, especially the mental, the emotional. So I will leave you with these thoughts, and hopefully I'll be able to upload them in time so you can replay it and gain some things out of it. Don't become like those seeds who get excited with a little bit of a smear of fertile soil. Initially, they get so excited, like in the gospel, there's that example of the Christian gospel. Instead, make sure your soil is deep and you send down your shoots, you send down your roots deep, deep, and take responsibility of your life and the well-being of your mind. That's why we have the Dhamma. May suffering ones be suffering-free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well, may you be protected by the triple gems. Supreme refuge. But it is through your thoughts, your words, and your bodily actions that you make that refuge truly palatable, tangible, felt, and valid with every breath taken with mindfulness, with every heartbeat that has within it metta towards you, towards the world. See you next week, and I believe the next sutta will be Sabhya Sutta, which I haven't yet retranslated, but I think I should be able to be done by then, next Saturday. So be well, and I'll see you then. Take care.